Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Colavecchio. If you're new with us today, and I'm going to walk us through the second part of what we have been calling some of the practices that God calls us to do. And we believe that there are 5 or 6 of these practices that when we engage with them and when we use them in a way that can bring a rhythm to life, we can experience God's presence in a greater way. And in fact, if you enter in deep enough into these things that we've been talking about, we believe that they position you in such a way that you not only experience the presence of God, but He begins to actually transform your life. And so that's part of my goal today. We are going to talk about something that a lot of churches talk about when we talk about being together and unity and all of that. But I want to try to do it a little differently. And I'm going to put some different words to it today, simply because I think we can just click into a certain mode when it comes to this, when it comes to the whole idea of what it means to be together. And my prayer has been, Lord, that you'd break out all of these boxes today. And I want you to know right off the top, this is not a pitch to make sure you get into a life group. I'm done. We're not even going there today. Because I do believe a life group is a great place to experience some of this. But in fact, there are life groups that aren't even going to be close to what I'm talking about today. But they're trying to be. They're trying, and this is setting a target for them to move towards. And I would pray that this would be all of our hearts' passion on this. And so I hope you have an outline. If you do, please take it out, because we're going to move kind of quickly through some of this. And as I've done in the earlier weeks, I want to talk about attention that you may feel. Because last week we talked about solitude, and then this week we're talking about togetherness. And I remember growing up in church just going, I'm trying to get that one down, and now you're dumping this one on me, and which one is it? Or if I'm not done with that one, should I go to this one, or should I leave that and go to this one, and then maybe come, and it just gets to be, well, which one is this thing? And I'd like to paint a different picture for you, is that many of these practices that we're talking about in this series feel like they're contradictory to each other. And it feels like and in fact, in a lot of ways, they are opposites. I mean, when you look at your page there, your notes, you'll see that there's solitude and then there's community. We're going to be talking about work and then rest. And you kind of go, well, which one is it? Or is there one more important than the other? Throughout Scripture, you will find again and again, and especially in the Old Testament, that the Israelites were called to feasting. They would have 7 major feasts every year. I mean, 7 of our Christmases, if you will, every single year. And then, yeah, Aaron, yeah, I'm into that. And then on the other side of that, you'll see that there's fasting. And so is it feasting or is it fasting? Which one? And this is where we get into the rhythms and understanding what each one is and why we're called to it. Andy Stanley says it this way. He said, when you don't look at things as contradictions, but when you look at them like tension, one of them, like we could talk about last week, we could say that that's like my thumb. The whole concept of being alone with God, solitude with Him is here. And then there's this idea of being together as people, really engaged with each other. And what he says that does is that creates, this opposites can create a tension that allows us to hold things. And the more of them you bring in, like things like the large gathering, not just the small gathering, when we talk about work as a rhythm and the Sabbath and resting, it's just more and more of these things that kind of create this hand that can grip on to God Himself. It was the way that he created us to move. And that's why, and I think part of the other reason that he does all these things that are so different is that, quite honestly, he's just not boring. I mean, I grew up feeling like, you grew up in church world your whole life. I mean, it's just like, I thought I knew everything about God. That's why I appreciated that story Rob just told. Because you start getting to a place where you go, I don't know that I know him very well at all. Because when you do, God is not boring. And he did not create us. The Bible says he created us fearfully and wonderfully. Multi-layered. Deeply intense. Longing for rest. Needing interaction. And so in this series, we're looking at those. And what we also have to understand is that everybody's starting in a different place. You may get one of these practices really well, and God's saying, okay, now I think you've got that one. Now I want to move you to this opposite over here. And we started with solitude. And maybe you feel like, I've really got that. I have someone in my family that really is into solitude. And it has gone to a place where they love it so much that they've almost felt like, I don't even know that I like the gathering because of this. And what happens is when we get out of balance and out of rhythm with God, these things that God gave us to bring us closer to him can almost keep us from him. Because there are going to be things that you will only learn together. I shared this as an example in the first service. I wasn't planning on this, but I was sitting right down here in our first service, and my kids come to the first service, and I have my grandson Leo. And so they like to bring Leo in. Leo's 1.5 years old, but he loves worship. And so they always bring him in, first service, during worship, and then when it's over, they bring him out and they put him in Kids Bridge. And so it just so happened I come walking up, and my wife, sitting about where Terry is, my wife has Leo right there. And so I walk up, and I have never had this happen, but Les is like, he's heavy here, take him, you know. And so Leo grabs on, and we're experiencing the worship service. And he is just locked. He is engaged, man, with this thing. And he loves music, and he's just watching. His eyes are this big. And I've never actually practiced and gone through a worship service with my grandson in my arm. And all I can tell you is that every song was different, simply because he was in my arms. When we were singing, I had a far greater picture of a multi-generational God. And I thought, who would have ever thought I would be standing here with this little guy in my arms worshiping God? He, at one point in the service while we were singing, he put his head on my chest, and and he just laid his head down. And I'm sitting there and I'm singing, and he can hear, I'm sure, as I'm singing. And I think it was the Lord. Maybe it was just me. I don't know. But because of this experience, I had this overwhelming sense in my soul that God was saying to me, Mark, this is what I feel. This is what I feel when you worship me. I bring you close, and in our worship, you just put your head on my chest, and I want you to just experience it. And that, quite simply, you could say all kinds of things about it, but that just wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a physical little 1.5-year-old in my arms. Something happened because he was there. And I want to talk to you about that today, and that's why I'm saying this goes far beyond a church program. This goes far beyond just trying to create something where and ramp people up and all that kind of. This goes to something so deep, and it goes to words that we use so much that I fear that they've lost their edge. We use words like community and fellowship. Or we get deep and go, for fellowship, we go to the Greek, koinonia, and we try to redefine, and we do all these things. And today, I want to look at this. And before we talk about why God calls us to this togetherness, I want to give you just a new definition, just a one-word definition. It was a word I learned in this context 12 years ago by a book by Erwin McManus that was called The Barbarian Way Out of Civilization. The Barbarian Way. And McManus writes, and in one of the chapters, he's talking, this whole book is about how Christianity has become so civilized. And he talks about we've got to get back to a barbarian heart for following God, for trusting him, for doing things that he calls us to do in radical, crazy faith. And so he's talking about this in this book, The Barbarian Way. And he gets to a chapter in this book, and it's called The Barbarian Tribe. The Barbarian Tribe. And this week, as I was preparing, and I was trying to find just a different way of saying it so we don't get locked in, man, that word just came back, the tribe. So I want to talk to you, and some of you have experienced what I'm going to talk about today, and some of you, you're going to sit there and go, I don't think I've ever quite got there. But I want you to know, I believe through the scriptures that this is God's heart for us. In fact, I would even say this is why you were created. So if you've got that outline, we're going to look at that. We're going to unpack just this simple word called tribe. I'll start with McManus, and he describes it as this: a people with a common mission and purpose, common priorities. You will find people in a tribe that is centered around God, that they have prioritized God, and they have prioritized family, and they prioritize things in their life, and they're trying to find those rhythms to make life livable, doable. We call it this at New Bridge. Our common priorities, our common mission, our purpose is simply this: to love God first and foremost. That is above everything. That is above me loving my wife. I love God. That is above my kids, knowing that His love, it is what empowers and fuels all the love to my children, to my family, to you, to the people, to my tribe, to the people around. Without that, when that's broken, I cannot love with His kind of love. And so I prioritize that. And obviously, we know from scriptures that God says, yes, of course you're going to love. And so we say it this way, that we love God, that's our priority. And then the second is just like, it cannot be disconnected from it. We love each other. When we talk about evangelism in our world, showing God, man, there is no greater way to do that than a group of believers that love each other. I mean, really love each other. And so we say we love God and we love each other, and our passion is to make His love known. It's to make His love known to every generation. And so we work towards that. When you're in a tribe and you understand the biblical principles, you know this: the people in your tribe will carry the same fire that you carry inside your belly. They will carry it. Their passion will burn just as hot as yours, or maybe even a little hotter. People that understand tribe, they don't minimize relationships. They understand that people do not slow you down. Listen. The wrong people slow you down. The wrong people in your life slow you down. And they are willing, because of their priority and their passions, they are willing to extricate if they have to. Because they know that there are relationships that pull you back to what you used to be, instead of relationships that press you towards what God created you to be, and what He wants you to be, and what He designed you to be. When you are with the right people, your life comes together slowly in ways that it never could if you were alone. And so we look to Scripture and you see that really the Bible is a book of relationships. It is a book of tribes when you read through the Scriptures. I don't know why, but somehow in the church today we have so, this is going to be so easy to misunderstand me, but we have so prioritized almost the solitudinal relationship with God that we have just wiped out and just so, in such a second, third, fourth priority to the relationship to his people. And when God calls somebody, when God calls someone into a relationship, he calls you to his body. He calls you to his body. And you just don't hear that a lot these days. I see people all the time that they so prioritize work, or they so prioritize just whatever hobby or whatever they're into, that relationships are so far down the list. I think I called it, they're like mercenaries. They're relational mercenaries. That my job, and if my job calls me out somewhere, I go because I'm just following that thing. Where when I read Scripture, the power of tribe and people that had grown and their hearts had been fused together like David's mighty men, the Bible talks about, that he fought with, and that protects. Man, in those situations, you saw such a kindred spirit. David and Jonathan. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, David and Jonathan, their hearts were bound together as one. And he loved Jonathan more than the love of his own brothers. David had all kinds of brothers. He said, this is a brother that'll stick closer than my brothers. There was something that was there. We read the book, the very short book in the Old Testament of Ruth. And we see that she bound her heart to her mother-in-law. And she said, let nothing separate us. And in all the weddings I do, when it gets to the vows of the wedding, of the marriage, I put the words of Ruth in those vows every time. And here's what they sound like. Where Ruth says to Naomi, her mother-in-law, because Naomi basically, Naomi's son was married to Ruth and he died. And so Naomi says, look, I'm poor, I'm old, I can't support you. You need to go back to your people. And Ruth binds herself to Naomi. She binds herself to her. And she says, I will not leave you. It's not about who's going to take care of me or any of that, but I bind my heart to you. And she says these words that I use. She says, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And then she goes on to say, may God deal with me ever so severely if even death would separate. I mean, I'm taking this all the way to death. Nothing is going to separate us. And I won't be a spoiler on the story, but you can read it on your own and what God does because of this incredible relationship. But living in a day where everything is about career, positioning, finances, we relationally we just treat our relationships often like mercenaries. I want to talk to you about why God calls us to be together. And I'm going to go pretty quick, and I'll tell you why I'm going to do this. I use this example in first service. I kind of see what I'm doing. I had this picture in my head of going to a store. You ever go to any of these big stores, and at the end cap, at the end of the aisle, they've got the little person with the cart out there. They got the little weenie rolled up in bacon, toothpick, and you know what they're doing. They know what you walk by and you smell it, and you go, oh, here, free sample. And so you try that or whatever the noodles are, whatever that's there. And then they always do the same thing. Oh, that's on aisle right over there, aisle 2, just right there. And I always go, yeah, no. I just like another one. May I have another one? And like almost every time, they just, sure, go ahead. And then I say, usually, can I have one for my wife? And then I realize, oh, she's home. This will never get there. And if she is there, it doesn't get there anyway. And I ask her, hey, Les, when you go, would you get me one? You know, and so I literally can move through that entire store and have a meal. I can pretty much do it. And I think that sometimes we come to church that way. What I'm going to give you are 6 little weenies wrapped in bacon, okay, right now. And the goal of this is that you would take this and bring it deeper. That you would, if you're in a group, great, study. If you're not, on the back side, there are questions to draw us farther. But this is not meant, Sundays as we gather is not meant to be some big monster meal that'll take you through the whole week. It just won't work. And so, I mean, grab everything you can right now. Everything you can off of this. But please, just don't let it stop there. So why does God call us to be together, especially as a tribe? Well, one reason that he calls us to be together is that he created us that way. You are actually hardwired. Even the most introverted person that there is, I want you to know that there is a piece of us that never can go as far as God would want to take us without his people. Without his people. And I see this all the time. You know, and people talk about this all the time. Well, I don't really need that, you know, and this is going to take a lot of different forms. So I'm not just talking about life. It's taking a lot of different forms. But he created us this way. In Genesis chapter 2, it says, it is not good that man should be alone. This is God speaking. This is the first time God says it's not good. Everything he had created up to this point was good. The fish were good. You know, he creates land and he says it's good. Sky, good. He creates, I mean, all of his creation is good until he gets to man and he says not good, right? And all the ladies said, all right. No, we don't roll that way. It wasn't that man wasn't good in how God created him. He says it's not good that he would be alone. He was incomplete. And so we use this verse all the time for marriage, and we use it for all kinds of things. But what this is really about is this whole that God creates inside of us, this need to be connected. So we'll see that. And if it's not done, if it's not dealt with, what we can do is we can move towards isolation. We move to isolation. And we can put a God face on isolation. I do it. I know what I'm talking about. I've tried to confess this to you, and I have certainly, my wife will tell you this, that my number one stumbling block is isolation, if left to myself. I don't know what it is. I don't understand that the older I get, it seems like it should be getting easier, but the older I get, I find myself more protected. Somebody came up to me after our first service and they said, you know, we were in this life group and these people, a lot of the group just, they kind of left and this and then, and they just said, you know, we've been together for years. And I just, man, my heart's broke. I guess we'll start it up again. And man, I knew what he was saying. I knew exactly what he was saying. Because if wounds don't get healed, and if things take place in our lives where we can actually be wounded, because it is a very sharp thing that happens in relationships. They're sharp. That's why people love just being alone with God. God will never hurt me, and that's true. But people, even people that call themselves Christians sometimes. It is this incredibly difficult thing that we deal with. And if wounds are not healed, we scab over things and we just pull back and we go into protection. And I just don't know if I've got all that energy to start. And that's what this person, I just don't know if I have the energy to jump back in. And then this person just stopped themselves and said, no, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. We were created to do this thing. The second reason that God calls us to be together is because he shapes us that way. He shapes us. There are influential people in our lives that God has used to shape us at different stages of our life. And I just kind of did, this is one of the questions on the back side, but I did this myself this week. And I thought about all the stages of my life. And when you're little, your parents have, for good or for bad. And it's not always good. Sometimes it's very difficult. It's very painful what can happen with families. And sometimes it's really just amazing and it's great. But our parents have that first stage of our lives of shaping just by proximity and doing things again and again. That's why I just think how much better life would be if my parents would have been in this kind of deep community. I think about some of you, and you don't even know if you're a great parent, but you're in community. You are a better parent because you are in community. Trust me. When your kids look up, and I dream of a church where our kids grow up thinking everybody's in a group, and everybody some point, or in some kind of relationships, everybody has a tribe somewhere. And it's just what we do. I think about how parents and how powerful that is. And then I think of the next stage of life when I hit very early high school and I met my best friend. His name's Mike Duggins. And Mike just had a profound shaping in my life. Man, our hearts were bound together. And he loved Jesus, man. This guy loved Jesus. And I'll be honest, this is the weirdest thing. Mike wanted to go into ministry. Mike was committed. When I get done with this, I'm going to college. I am going into ministry. I love youth ministry. And you know what? This is how deep it was for me. You know why I went into ministry? Because Mike did. Mike's no longer in ministry, and he's in a different kind of ministry. Mike loves Jesus, and it's an amazing thing. But that literally was the effect that it had on me. I didn't know what I wanted to do, And I just think of those stages of meeting my wife. Holy cow. I mean, the effect that my wife has had on me. The shaping power that she has had on my life. And it starts, whether it's over here or over here. I mean, these things, I think of how with my wife, it started in community. In big community. And then it kind of just like with the Lord, a lot of times we start in community, we start in church services like this, and then we end up later, desiring more of the solitude, and we build that, and then we build this next area and the next area. That's what happens when we're together. And I think of mentors in my life, and I think of friends who we planted this church with. Friends that have served here. It's a crazy thing. People in groups that I've been in, it's just an amazing thing. Our leadership team, 2 of them were praying down here at the end of the first service, and I just walked over and I said, man, thank you for being part of my tribe. Thank you for letting me tribe with you. It was Doug Vaughn and Stephanie, and Doug just says, let's go get tattoos. Let's go get tattoos. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. They shape our lives. Every parent knows this. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians 15:33. It says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Every parent knows this. When a kid comes home with and you see things, that go deeper. And I'm not talking about surface things, but you just see some things and you go, man, I'm not sure about this relationship. You know the effect, because maybe that's happened. It probably has happened with all of us at some point. And those relationships, there's ones that pull us back. The Bible tells us that if you want great character, surround yourself with people that have great character. Look at the book of Proverbs 13:20. It says, if you want wisdom, walk with the wise and you'll become wise. Walk with them. Make them part of your tribe and you will become wise. If you want people to love God recklessly and passionately, find them. It shapes our lives. Third, it sharpens us. It sharpens us. We've heard Proverbs 27:17. It says, iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens another. You know, that sounds really good, doesn't it? You know how sharpening happens? Sharpening happens in a community of differences. Of differences. Sometimes you hear a talk like this and you go, okay, I want to build the tribe. I want to start doing something. And so what we do is when that takes place, man, we go out and try to find people just like us. But it's not always the best way to do it. Sometimes it's people that are far different from us. But we have got to know what to look for, because when we do, we see that even in our differences, those things grind against each other. They grind on us and they sharpen us. Yeah, right now, you may be sitting next to a Republican. Right now. Or a Democrat. You might be sitting, I mean, this is, when you think of the body of Christ, it's an amazing thing. And the only way it works is when our common bond is Jesus above everything else. Then those things become agents to which we can just sharpen each other. Fourth, he speaks. The reason God calls us together, because he speaks to us that way. Matthew 18, it just simply says this, wherever two or three, Jesus said, are gathered together in my name, I am there among them. Who hasn't been in his presence? Who hasn't been in a tribe at some point where you didn't feel like God spoke to you somehow through someone there? Fifth, he strengthens us. He strengthens us that way. One of my favorite passages about this whole idea of tribe is this. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. It says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. They get multiplied effect. For if either falls, his companion will lift him up. But pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person keep warm? Verse 12, and if someone overpowers one person, two can resist them. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. This is a tribe that he's speaking of. It strengthens us. Listen, your greatest strength is not when you can prove you don't need anybody. Your greatest strength is when you no longer have to prove that you can do it alone. That is your greatest strength. He not only strengthens us in these relationships, but he protects us this way. When you read that exact same verse, you'll find there almost a given in that verse. What's the given? The given is you're going to stumble. Come on. We could try to play it nice right now, but the fact is that we all stumble and we even fall sometimes, and we fall hard. I get very concerned about the person or people that just act like they've got it all together. They have got every answer, and they kind of act like it's all just because of biblical stuff going on. But they have got every answer to every situation, and there's a harshness that's a part of this thing. And you know what? When that happens, you just sit there and go, we all fall. pity. Pity the person that falls and has no one there who can help them up. Here's my question to you. If you have a tribe, who is it that feels free to ask you if you're okay? And they won't accept fine for an answer. They will never accept fine. That's what a tribe does. For weeks now, I've been kind of salting and just dropping this statement out, if you've been around. It's from an African saying that says this: if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I want to add to that today. If you want to go far, fast, go with your tribe. Find your tribe and go with tribe. There's a lot of people, and I've been one of them, that just have every reason to run fast. And you run and you run and you run and you run fast. And every once in a while, in these moments where God just kind of catches you, you find yourself thinking, why am I running so fast? What am I actually doing? Is it just for this money? Is it just for this position? Is it just for stuff? God has called us to togetherness. All right, let me give you a quick application. That means, what do you do with this thing? How do I do this? And I call it the 3 ups. We did this in our teaching team together. And I want you to just understand, when I talk about this, some of these things, it's quick. You fill in a blank, you kind of write a couple of statements. This can take a long time. This is not a quick, simple thing sometimes. But the first thing that you do is you show up. Now, where you show up says really your commonality. It says what you're doing. If I care right now, and I'm saying this season, I'm really going to focus on getting more healthy. Okay? So I may show up at CrossFit. I may show up at a gym. And by me just showing up there, it speaks to the goal. It speaks to what I'm doing there, right? I don't get up the first morning and go, okay, this is all, I got some challenges and I want to be better in this area of getting my health together. So yeah, not feeling it today. You know what I feel like? I feel like San Francisco Bakery is just calling my name. It is the song inside my head right now. By me going there, it speaks to the fact if I show up there to what it's really about. So first of all, figure out what it is you're going after and show up. Show up. The other part of showing up is this. We call it paying relational rent. And sometimes you just, this whole first season is about you going in and just investing. You're investing. See, listen. A tribe is preventative. I mean, write that down. That's really good. And that's really important. A tribe is preventative. In other words, it's like retirement. I don't make one deposit into a retirement account and then the next day go, I'd like to draw it out. The same day you're going to start drawing out, you better not be putting into a retirement account. You have been investing in this relationship or these relationships for years and years sometimes. And you've been putting in there, and then when you need it, it's there. That's the way this thing works, called tribe. And you take the responsibility for this. And you you start finding ways to do it. It may not be a life group for you. But what you show up will give you the head start. The environment you show up in will give you the head start into this. So show up, take responsibility. And then the second thing, open up. You just can't always be playing the games. Now, I want to be really clear because we're in this really fast world, right? Please, the first time, you got to invest in those relationships. The first time, if you ask somebody, you look like fun, okay, you want to go out to get some dinner? You want to go do something? Our kids, let's go to a children's museum together. And then all of a sudden, you just start dumping the load on a brand new person. Okay, it calls for that investment. Take your time to build those relationships. But there will come a point when the time is right, and you're going to have to risk. You're going to have to open up. The third thing is follow up. Show up, open up, and follow up. If somebody shares, remember, this is not just about, the people that are with us. My question is this: who are you with? It's not just the people that have my back. Who are the people in my tribe that I have their back? And so when it comes to this, if someone shares, man, we follow up. And let me tell you the place to start. Follow up in prayer. Follow up in prayer. Because prayer is where it goes deep into your soul when you start praying for a person. And you're praying for them every day. And the more you pray for them, it starts to permeate your thoughts and your care for them. And then just simply follow up. Remember to ask them. Listen, Jesus modeled all of this for us, didn't he? Jesus showed up. It says in John chapter 1 that he dwelt for a while. He left heaven. He dwelt for a while among us. He showed up on this earth. Secondly, Philippians 2, it says, we're talking about Jesus showing up. It says speaking of Jesus, who knew equality with God, something he could have hung on to. He could have just gripped it and not let go. He lets go of that. And he comes among us. Jesus shows up. And he opens himself up. Not with everybody. Isn't that interesting? In John chapter 2, it says that he was in Jerusalem one day, and the crowds were coming to him because he had fed the thousands, and he had done all this crazy stuff that they had seen, and they're all over him. And you know what it says? Jesus would not entrust himself. He would not open himself up to them because he knew what was inside of them. But he had his 12. He had his tribe. He had his tribe. And you know what he said to them the night before he was crucified? He said, listen, I don't even call you servants anymore because a servant doesn't know what his master's doing. His master just says, go do it. They never say why. He just says, go do it, and they go. He said, I call you now friends. You know why? Because I have told you everything. I've left nothing undone. I have opened myself. He goes up to pray at Gethsemane the night before he's crucified, and he draws them. He says, you guys stay here. You 9 stay here. You 3 come closer. Watch me. Pray with me. And then he goes, I've opened everything up to you. Everything. And then he dies, and he says, don't worry. I'm going to follow up. I'm going to put my very spirit inside of you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And that is what we remember when we go to the table. So, band, come on up, man. We're going to go to the table now because we are going to take these things and we're going to remember that Jesus, what he did at the cross is he bridged all of our brokenness. He bridged every bit of sin, and he calls us together in his body to go to the table, and to remember this. And I want to take you maybe to a little bit different place than you've been before, but here's how we're going to do it. The first part we're going to do as we always do. There are 4 tables, one in each corner. And there's a little piece of bread, and there's a little cup that represent the body and the blood of Jesus. And if you're a believer today, and you want to go to this table, you just slip out of your seat. You can go to any of the 4. And just take that little piece of bread and the cup. Bring it back to your seat. It's very important that we do it, that we take it together, though. So wait before you take it. And then I'll come back up and I'll give some instruction. But God, I pray right now that you would draw us close to your heart. That in this time of greatest intimacy, when we remember, Jesus, the sacrifice, that we would remember what it's for as we go to the table. When you're ready, you can.